Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive, frankly mind-boggling global paradox that has puzzled people for literally centuries. You know exactly what I'm talking about. We've all seen it happen. Why on earth do terrible, deeply corrupt leaders often manage to cling to power for decades, while the seemingly good, civic-minded ones get booted out of office after just a single term?
It really is the central mystery of human governance. Why do bad leaders survive while the good ones fall? Well, to actually solve this, we have to completely flip our perspective. We're going to look at politics not as this epic battle of good versus evil or right versus left, but as a universal, strictly mathematical game of survival and incentives. We are breaking down the absolute mechanics of power today, from the most ancient monarchies right up to the most modern democracies.
Here's our roadmap for today. 1. The rules of power. 2. The anatomy of kleptocracy. 3. The democratic engine. 4. The rational ignorance trap. And 5. Institutions govern our prosperity. Let's get right into it.
Section 1, the rules of power, uncovering the math of survival. Okay, so to really get this, we have to strip away all the moral labels. We just have to accept a fundamental, undeniable reality. All leaders, totally regardless of their ideology, their title, or what country they're in, share one primary goal. They just want to stay in power. And to pull that off, they have to play by a very specific set of rules.
The first concept we need to wrap our heads around is the Selectorate. Just think of this as the ultimate pool of potential supporters. It's the specific group of people who actually have a formal role, or the institutional characteristics required to choose the government's leadership. Now, depending on the system you're looking at, this group could be massive, like every single adult citizen in a modern democracy. Or it could be astonishingly tiny, like the 236 barons who had a say in choosing the king back in King John's England.
Now, nested right inside that Selectorate is a much more exclusive group, and we call them the winning coalition. Guys, these are your true kingmakers. This is the subset of the Selectorate whose support is absolutely 100% essential for the incumbent to actually stay in power. They control the vital resources. And if enough members of this winning coalition jump ship and defect to a rival politician, well, the leader loses office. It's that simple.
Picture how any society on Earth is built. You've got the massive base, which is the total population of residents. Inside that, you have the enfranchised Selectorate, and buried deep inside that is the all-important winning coalition. The dynamic between the sizes of these specific groups dictates entirely how a leader is going to behave.
To show you just how insanely small a winning coalition can actually get, let's look at an astonishing anecdote from an election in Kenya back in 1989. They were using a queue voting system at the time where voters literally had to line up behind their candidate's representative. A super popular candidate named Dr. Kiano won over 92% of the vote. I mean, the chalkboard at the polling station tallied 9,566 votes for him and only 780 for his relatively unknown rival, Weru. But the returning officer in charge simply walked out and declared that Weru won with 9,000 votes to Kiano's 2,000. Under those specific institutional rules, the winning coalition required to put Weru in power was essentially just one single man, that corrupt returning officer. Wild, right?
Section 2. The Anatomy of Kleptocracy, the Dictator's Playbook. By manipulating the sizes of these nested groups we just talked about, a leader can actually create the perfect, fertile environment for a kleptocracy, which is, plain and simple, the outright theft of a nation's wealth. The math here is fascinating. When a leader structures their government to have a massive selectorate, meaning millions of people could theoretically be pulled into the inner circle, but an incredibly small winning coalition, a pretty terrifying dynamic takes over. Because the winning coalition is tiny, its members are easily replaced from that massive pool of the selectorate. So they live in constant terror of losing their privileged status, which breeds extreme, unquestioning loyalty to the leader. And because the leader only has to keep that tiny little group happy, they don't have to spend much on the general public at all. That leaves a massive mountain of leftover government revenue as the leader's own personal piggy bank. That is the very definition of a kleptocracy.
It all really just boils down to what a leader has to actually buy to stay in power. Autocrats, who rely on a tiny winning coalition, buy private goods. They reward their few essential cronies with personal wealth, lucrative contracts, and special privileges. Democrats, on the other hand, have a massive winning coalition. They literally cannot afford to buy millions of supporters their own private yacht. Instead, they're forced by the math to buy public goods, the rule of law, decent schools, free trade, and infrastructure that actually benefits everybody.
Section 3. The Democratic Engine, Prosperity Through Math. Let's flip the script and explore exactly what happens when that winning coalition gets huge, fundamentally changing the entire incentive structure for the person in charge.
The brilliant 19th century thinker Alexis de Tocqueville actually hit the nail on the head regarding this math over a century ago. He observed that, sure, human nature is probably the same everywhere, with plenty of people more than willing to be bought off, but in a democracy, buying off a massive coalition is mathematically impossible. It's simply way too expensive to bribe millions of voters with private handouts. There just isn't enough money to go around. So, the absolutely crucial point here is this formula. Because leaders with massive winning coalitions have to provide broad public goods rather than private bribes, they create environments where citizens actually want to work. They tend to keep taxes relatively lower so that everyday citizens get to enjoy the fruits of their own labor. When people know the government isn't just going to swoop in and expropriate their surplus to pay off a handful of cronies, they actively choose to labor rather than just take leisure. This mathematical necessity is the true engine that fuels massive economic growth in democracies. It's pretty amazing.
Section 4, the rational ignorance trap, the hidden vulnerability. Okay, but democracy isn't flawless. We need to introduce a brilliant twist from the economist Mancur Olson. It's this hidden trap that threatens even the most prosperous, long-standing democracies on the planet today.
It all starts with a concept called rational ignorance. Let's frame this directly around you. Think about your incredibly busy daily life. Do you honestly have the time to sit down and read a 500-page bill on agricultural subsidies before you cast your vote? Probably not, right? Because the statistical chance of your one single vote altering a national election is basically zero. It's actually completely rational for you to spend your time earning a living or hanging out with your family rather than obsessively studying minor policy details. You, just like most citizens, are rationally ignorant.
And because the vast majority of us remain rationally ignorant, the whole system becomes vulnerable to what Olson calls the sclerosis sequence. Narrow, super highly organized special interest groups, like industry lobbies or cartels, step right into that void. They quietly push for obscure regulations, little tax loopholes, or tariffs. The average voter doesn't even notice, but these policies extract immense wealth for that small group. And here's the truly shocking part. To gain just a tiny fraction of the nation's GDP, these special interests often push policies that cause overall social losses 100 times greater than what they actually pocket themselves. Over time, this literally chokes the economy.
Of course, getting one of these special interest groups organized has massive startup costs, and it requires some truly ruthless leadership to get off the ground. Take the famous story of a young Jimmy Hoffa. He was working in this unorganized warehouse in Detroit. He bided his time and waited for a sweltering summer day when a massive shipment of highly perishable strawberries finally arrived. Realizing his employer absolutely couldn't afford to let that cargo spoil in the heat, Hoffa seized that exact moment of leverage to persuade his coworkers to strike. The employer caved instantly. That right there is exactly how narrow, organized interests overcome the huge costs of collective action and began to build their power.
Section 5. Institutions govern our prosperity. The final paradigm shift. Let's pull the whole shebang together now. What we're really learning here is that long-term economic miracles and catastrophic national failures are not tied to the personal morality or goodness of individual leaders. They are deeply, mechanically tied to the institutional structures those leaders are forced to operate within.
Take Great Britain as a macro example. Because they enjoyed centuries of relative stability without a total institutional collapse, it actually allowed layers upon layers of narrow special interests to slowly organize and choke their economic growth, a phenomenon people sometimes call the British disease. On the exact opposite end of the spectrum, look at Germany and Japan right after World War II. Their institutions and organized special interests were completely, utterly wiped out. This massive institutional reset leveled the playing field, making way for the sweeping public goods and jaw-dropping economic miracles those nations experienced in the decades that followed.
So what is the big takeaway from all this? Whether we're talking about ancient Roman bandits, tribal chiefs, or modern-day presidents, it is the mechanical structure of the polity that dictates our prosperity. Period. When leaders need millions of people to survive in office, they build schools, they pave roads, and they create prosperity. When they only need a few, they steal. It is the institutions, the mathematical ratio of the Selectorate to the winning coalition, that decide our fate, not the inner goodness of the politician. Which leaves us with one final, pretty profound question to chew on today. Look closely at your own government, wherever it is you live, right now. Look past the speeches, look past the PR campaigns, and ask yourself, who is really in the winning coalition? Who actually holds the keys to power? If you can figure that out, you will understand exactly why your government acts the way it does. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions, and I'll see you all next time.